Sounds good.
We'll see ourselves when on the monitor when it starts.
This live.
Oh boy. Well, welcome to Busting Fear. We had some technical difficulties tonight, so we're starting about a half hour late. Well, that's what happens when you have no money coming in, no one donating any funds, and everybody here is volunteer, and they do absolutely everything they can to make the show happen. And even though we got started a little bit late, I do want to say how much I appreciate everybody that comes and everybody that volunteers to put on not only our show, Busting Fear, but also the Underground show, which comes on at 9 o'clock with Adrian and Mike. And tonight, also want to remind you that this is a live call-in talk show. You can call in. I do have the phone. I think I finally know how to make it work now. And wouldn't it be nice if all phones were the same and they just worked all the same? Anyway, the live call-in number is 360-693-7544. That's 360-693-7544. And tonight, Michael is going to introduce a topic that he's been thinking about, and it is about illusions versus perceptive reality. And he may say it a little bit differently, but I just want to say how much I appreciate the ability to even be here and to share our thoughts and ideas, to perhaps poke you to thinking about things differently and seeing through this illusion and set yourself free. So, Michael, would you like to share your thoughts about what is reality? Is perception reality?
Oh.
He gave me notes.
I gave her notes. We were discussing this the other day, and I thought it was kind of an interesting topic. And a fundamental question, I think, is, well, what is reality? In fact, when I was in college, we had an elevator. People would write stuff on the elevator, and one time it said, reality is something for people who cannot handle drugs. So I was wondering about, well, that's an interesting definition. But one of the things that I've heard frequently is this idea that perception is reality, and I think that's a destructive belief. It comes from this idea that perception is, obviously perception is what we receive from the five senses or sometimes six senses.
Why do you think that's a destructive belief? Why do you think perception of what is destructive?
Because what I believe is that there is an objective reality.
Mm-hmm.
So let's use the term objective reality. Let's say there is a truth, there's a true reality, there's a true nature of the universe. And we perceive it, all of us, each of us here in the room from our different viewing points, may perceive that a little bit differently. But what I'm saying is it's the same, we're here in the same room, even though it's perceived differently. In other words, there is a fundamental reality that can be understood by all. Now,
why do you think people have different perceptions of what is real?
Part of it is coming from the different senses. Example: in this room, we have people that are seeing us each from different angles. So how they're perceiving the world is slightly different. How they feel.
Excuse me for 1 second.
Sure.
Technical difficulties.
This is a live show, folks. Things happen. Let's see. Did anything provoke me this week?
Luckily, you're not talking about me.
No, I'm not talking about you. Oh, I watched
Let's
part of a great YouTube video by Thomas Sheridan explaining a range of psychopathic behavior and how it manifests. And he has really studied it. He's written a book called Puzzling People and something else. His website is thomassheridanarts.com if you're interested and you want to learn what he has to say. So that's what provoked me this week. So continue about perception and reality.
Well, so years ago I used to teach companies and how to do systematic research and how to do problem solving, and I used to teach the scientific method. And one of the things I used to tell people is I need to inaugurate within their company the birth of modern science. In other words, they need to think about how do they acquire knowledge. And so, again, let's start with this idea that there really is an objective reality out there, basically a truth that we want to understand. And what I'm saying is that how we acquire knowledge, if we do it properly, it will move us closer and closer to understanding or approximating what reality really is, if I can use those terms. So if we systematically study things, hopefully we'll come closer to understanding the truth. So it's interesting when you look at the scientific method. The scientific method was basically, in simple terms, it's asking nature a question. So when we look at the scientific method as involving experiments, you would come up with a hypothesis and you would say, if this hypothesis is true, and I do this, I should get this result.
But isn't that already a dogma that you've put in place?
No, it's a hypothesis.
It's a hypothesis. What is the difference between a hypothesis and a dogma?
I would say a dogma isn't testable. So think about this. If I look at I'm forming a scientific hypothesis. I'm saying I believe that if I increase the pressure in this, machine, I should get this kind of result. Based on my understanding of how this might work. And so what I do is I run this experiment, and I get a result, and that result is either going to confirm or reject my underlying assumption. So from that we have a feedback mechanism. You see, so I'm better able to understand what is really in existence. Now what's interesting is I used to tell companies, and I love this quote from Theodore Roosevelt. He said, if 25% of everything I believed was real, that would far exceed my wildest expectations. And I thought, that's really a wonderful quote. In fact, I would tell companies that. And I can't tell you how accurate that is. I would tell companies, I would say, probably 25% of everything you believe about the manufacture of your product, how your process works, how your product performs, it's probably not real. Now, unfortunately, I can't tell you of all the things you believe, which ones are the 25% that aren't true. So that's what we have to figure out. We have to figure out what is reality and what is not, what actually works and what is not. And so when we would be working with these companies, we'd start doing research and start finding things that the process did not behave the way they thought they did. And there's a rule that says, if you think the process behaves one way and the process behaves another way, the process always wins.
Can you give it an example of their preconceived idea of what was working, and you set up the experiment and you found that wasn't true?
Well, for example, and I'll use in the saw chain field, I used to design saw chain for chainsaws. So back in the engineering days, we had this belief that you could never make a chain safer and increase its cutting speed. And the things that we were working about is when you did things to increase the cutting speed of a chainsaw, it would also have the tendency to kick back to a greater level. We had some ideas that as we manipulated the designs, it would allow us to increase the speed and increase the safety at the same time. But we didn't believe that that was possible. So it's kind of interesting because we ran experiments and we found that there were some interactions that we'd never knew about before. And we came up with a design that was, for us, violated a law of thermodynamics. It was something that we believed you just couldn't have this. It couldn't work this way. And so that's what happens sometimes is you start studying things and you find out, well, the world really isn't how you think it is. And how you think the world works isn't necessarily how you think it is. So one of the things that I've concluded over the years is, as you think about acquiring knowledge and and I think many of us really would like to know the truth, how things really are. I found that the more you know you don't know. And as you start acquiring more knowledge, you realize, wow, there's much more. Well, a couple years ago, I noticed something. And when you start getting into history and politics and all these things, I found that the more you know, the less believable it is. As you start really getting it and understanding it, and
less believable what is?
The less believable if I was to explain certain things, it would almost come off as unbelievable because you wouldn't be able to understand all the background that led to that conclusion.
Okay, sure.
So it becomes more and more difficult when you do that.
So if you're talking people that don't have the same background of an understanding that you might, when you start to explain it because they don't have that information,
Yes.
it might seem not
You know,
sound reasoning.
Let's take an example. A few weeks ago on this show, you had an acupuncturist,
Yes.
which is quite interesting. And you look at, and I would read actually very technical people discussing acupuncture. And it was kind of interesting. And some of the people were almost smart alecky. You say, oh, yeah, of course, when you put a needle in somebody, of course, you're going to get some kind of reaction. You know. All right, so what bothers me about that is I see these kinds of things, but the problem is they don't understand the science.
Yes.
So let me just give you some insights that most people have no idea. So back in the 60s, there was a Korean. His name was Bong Han. And what he did is he used radioactive tracer materials, and he injected it into the acupuncture points. And what he did is he watched those acupuncture points, and he watched the radioactive material, and it followed along certain channels. And these channels weren't associated with blood vessels. They weren't associated with the nervous system. It was unique channels. And those channels happened to be exactly where acupuncturists for thousands of years have described, here's where the meridians are. So here is people that poo-poo this kind of thing,
Yes.
but they don't understand that there's actually a whole science around it. And what they actually discovered when we get into acupuncture is that we have, and this is one of the difficulties with Western science, they can't understand it because they think of the basic body systems, from cardiovascular, nervous, and other things. This is a completely different system. It has properties that we have, that most Western people in the medical world have no concept. So I can tell you some interesting things about it. Not only is it, there are tubules that travel through the body that these acupuncture meridians and points are connected to. Mm-hmm. The material within them is a high level of DNA and RNA. It also is interesting is that if there's a disturbance in the body, there's a difference in the resistance from one side to the other. That can only happen with a semiconductor. It's operating under different principles. So when you look at this whole field of acupuncture, and we can go on about that, but you look at, here is a lack of understanding of the science because they've never been exposed to it. So when you tell them, hey, I can stick needles in you and you're going to feel better, the idea that could happen would be completely foreign to someone.
Okay. Hold on just a... Okay, sure. Adrian, did you want to come on up and throw your hat into the ring? While Adrian comes up, I'm just going to remind you this is a live call-in talk show. 360-693-7544. 360-693-7544. Is the plate part of the
Yes.
your point? Okay, cool.
So, what you were talking about is our knowledge increases, so does our awareness that
Yes.
what we don't know becomes bigger too.
Yes.
And the analogy I heard, and it made a lot of sense to me, was that if you consider what's inside of a circle, the amount of knowledge you have.
Okay.
So this is all the knowledge you have. So as you know, as a circle gets bigger, so does its circumference.
Yes.
And so if you picture the outside being what you don't know, okay, so this is your awareness.
Yes.
Now, as this awareness grows, so does the
Oh, yes.
circumference that you can see how much you don't know around it. The gray
Yes.
area outside of the circle becomes bigger.
Yes.
And I thought that was a very good analogy for just
Yeah,
the more you start to learn something, you realize you've only scratched the surface.
Yes.
You
and
can, I think you can see that circle better
Well, I'm just trying to
from the
avoid
color. It's kind of hard. The white. No, the white shows up okay.
I'm trying
All right.
not to date ourselves
Yeah.
too bad with
There.
our Happy New Year plays. But
Okay.
yeah, I thought that was a pretty good analogy. Just when you really start to, think you know something, and then you delve into it and scratch the surface, you realize how
Yes.
much there is still to go.
Is there a topic that you have found true for you as you've researched?
Well, there's lots of things I believe to be true.
Okay.
One of my subjects I like studying is astrophysics. Just
Astrophysics?
formation of stars, that kind of
Wow.
stuff. Just building blocks of the galaxy. I've always found that stuff fascinating.
I remember Jesus, probably 35 years ago, I never understood what a light year was. That didn't make any sense to me. So if I was reading this article in National Geographic, and I finally understood that it's the amount of time that it takes the light to travel to Earth. And then I realized, I went,
the
well,
distance,
wait,
the distance light would travel in 1 year.
in year,
Yeah.
right. But beyond that, I realized that if a galaxy or star system is 10 light years away, it's not in that position anymore.
Oh, yeah.
That's where the light
Where it
was
was.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're actually
So-
viewing history.
Yep.
Yes, and we're
Looking
not,
back in time.
and we're not actually seeing how it is now, because it takes
Yeah.
that amount of time for the light to travel, so that we can even recognize that it's
Yeah.
available to look at.
Yeah.
So that's an illusion too.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of perception versus reality.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we have extraterrestrials looking at us seeing dinosaurs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Unless they're local.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I guess that's about all I had.
Oh, that's
Thank-
good.
Thanks
Great,
for having me up.
great analogy.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it just occurred to
Okay.
me when you were talking about that. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Adrian.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your participation. Okay, Michael, question. Is our reality being manipulated?
Well, that's an interesting question. Let's go back to give you a marketing example. There was two individuals, a gentleman by the name of Al Reese and Jack Trout released a book in 1981, and the title of that book was "Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind." And it became a classic, and it's one of those books that people discuss in the idea of when you're marketing products. So in the field of marketing, they talk about the ability, they use the 4 Ps. You can manipulate the product, you can change your product or service that you're offering to the customer to make it more desirable to them, or you can change the price, or you can change your distribution system. They use that for place, or the other thing you can do is change the position. Now, when we talk about position, we're talking about changing not the product itself, but only how you perceive the product.
I think we were talking before we started the show about positioning Cheerios as a heart-healthy
Which is, yes.
item to eat.
Yes, so I'll come back to that, but let me give you another example. Think about a Coca-Cola ad. Coca-Cola isn't coming out with an ad that says, these are these wonderful ingredients, this is what it does to the physiological system of the body. They don't run ads like that.
In other words, they don't tell you the truth about what the ingredients
they
will
don't-
really do to the body.
Because that's not what they're attempting to do. What they're trying to do is get your mind to associate when you see Coca-Cola, it's with life and fun and family and whatever. Or a beer commercial. It's partying and whatever and glamorous women and all of these different things that could be associated with the drinking of beer. It's not about necessarily the quality of the beer. Sometimes they do, but it's generally about what they can do to manipulate the mind to, when they see that product, you're perceiving it in a certain way. So that's in the field of marketing. But think about what happens when we get into, the political world. They're doing the exact same thing. We have, and what I like to use the term reality engineers. We have people that are basically trying to engineer the world. So, for example, if you look at U.S. elections, they are basically positioning the candidates. They're saying things that may or may not be, they offer, whatever promises that they're not going to fulfill them, but they make the promises because they sound good, and they position these people to be such and such. They're for family values, or they're for.
I heard you.
And about ready to go to a commercial?
Well, about 45 seconds.
45 seconds? Okay. So if we look at elections, again, it's not about what are the real understandings that you need to make a decision as to who should be the candidate. It's really, how do I manipulate the population to vote for me? So it's a more of a form of mind control than it is necessarily about education and understanding the truth and determining who is going to be a better candidate and why they're going to be a better candidate and how they're going to fulfill that office. That's not what's important. It is, how can I convince the population that I want to vote this way, and it may be completely superficial because I'm for hope and change. Well, what does that mean?
Commercial is about to come on.
Okay,
So,
let's turn this over to our sponsors.
And welcome to Brew, your local cafe and pub. Offering you a variety of services, we have beer, coffee, wine, and food. You can find us on Facebook at Brew360 and online at brewcafepub.com.
okay, folks, we're back. And Tim, did you want to add anything to the discussion?
Besides, it's very understandable, very sincere. I've done pretty much the same work over my lifetime with companies. What I always found out, it's always, and I would tell the clients, it's always better to have somebody coming in from the outside looking in with no preconceived notions.
Yes.
Than you guys battling and fighting over change, but you're looking from the inside to the inside.
Yes.
So I totally agree with your stance in this, because reality and stuff that's not a reality, I think is.
And it's interesting. You can come in from the outside and you go into somebody's home and you say, that's really an ugly picture, and they stop and look and say, well, you're right. But after a while, they just kind of tune things out and they don't pay attention to certain things. And as an outsider, sometimes you don't have the same. You don't have the same underlying beliefs and assumptions that they have, and when you come in from the outside, sometimes you can be insightful, and you're not saying anything brilliant. You're just saying what anyone from the outside might say because you're looking at it from a different perspective.
It's amazing how many things, I kind of thought that before.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you confirmed something that you didn't even think that they knew about.
Yes.
Or didn't know how to utilize the understanding of what they had just said.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I helped a lot of companies, whether it's to help restructure the company, they wanted to sell and they didn't have the right stuff monetarily or anything. And this coming in from outside is always a benefit to these companies, especially they want to get into an IPO situation. Yes. Or I worked for a company here a couple of years ago that was just starting. I knew nothing about the industry. I turned them down 4 times for a contract. Mm-hmm. But finally I did. And they thought it was kind of silly of me saying, well, this is my goal, 2010, wanting to start up an SEO company. And I said, my goal is hit $1 million your first year. Mm-hmm. That's a nervous habit.
Yes, I know.
We hit 1.1.
Right.
But so hopefully you agree that you don't have to know anything about an industry, company, business you're going to help.
That's true.
It's true.
It's funny. One of the things that we would, and what was happening with the work I was doing, going back into the 80s, companies were going into this quality revolution, and it was hard to you had to bite your lip to keep from laughing. But you'd hear the question, will this work for our industry? And we'd say basically, well, I believe that the scientific method does apply to you. And we would hear this over and over again, and they just have to sometimes learn it for themselves. And everybody would always think they were special. Mm-hmm. I remember going from one box plant to another, and I was with this other woman, and we were touring these different plants, and they were saying, well, we're unique here. And we're looking at, another flexor folder gluer, another corrugator. We were saying exactly the same thing, but they always like to believe that they were unique.
Why?
Yeah.
Part of that is kind of a personal need, I think. Sometimes people
Personal need to believe that you're
unique and special.
the special and you're the number one. Mm-hmm. Do you happen to watch Scandal, the TV show Scandal, at all?
No, never heard of it.
Okay. Well, he was talking earlier about the politician manipulation, and Scandal is an excellent example of putting spin on all kinds of tragic situations.
That's a great term. We started hearing that, a dozen years ago, started hearing the term spin.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So, and think about what spin means. Spin means you take a situation and you spin it to change the perception of reality.
Exactly.
It's exactly kind of what we're talking about tonight. So we think about spin. Spin is the manipulation of the masses and how they think.
Can you give us an example of something that's kind of glaring spin, of something that's been...
Oh, let's think about what happened in 9/11 and how that was spun and how you're either with us or you're against us.
And you guys, he's the same thing.
Yeah, yep,
What difference does it make?
yep.
You
But,
know?
but
Yes.
it creates
terrible.
they're creating the illusion. You know, in fact,
Yes.
that kind of gets us into this whole idea. How do you get a nation involved in war?
Just to add that 70% of the American people do not believe the spin that they've put on 9/11 that happened here in the United States to
Yes.
bring down the two towers. And that building number 7, which was kind of an impossible feat. And a lot of people don't know this, but there was an earthquake registered under the two towers before they ever fell. So think about that,
Yep.
folks. Oh, this is a live call-in show. You may call in and talk to us. I have the phone, 360-693-7544, 360-693-7544.
Okay, so let's say we want to control the population. Let's say that's our goal. So how are we going to do that? We could use force. We could basically create a prison state and force people to be compliant. Or what we could do is we could engineer the minds of the people such that they will be a compliant population. So they go along whether and they think it's by choice. And so that's actually the real goal. It's kind of interesting. So it's fundamental to this question is what does it take to bring a country into war? You think about, let's say take Iraq. After a while you start figuring out it's the same methodology. Usually what will happen is some country will be deemed to be bad for one reason or another. And then usually they'll start doing things like economic sanctions and other things, and then start creating, problems. They did this with Iraq. They tried to get us into war with Iraq. Of course, they tried to get us into war with Syria. So it's interesting when you think about war. It's really a very small number of people that actually make the decision that we want to go to war. So we're talking about generally, even a nation of our size, it's a handful of people that make this decision. It's time for us to go to a war.
Yep.
The next thing that they have to do is they have to get the country on board. And so the question is, how are they going to do that? So they have to somehow position the opponent country into be a negative and basically excite the masses. Well, it's interesting. Let's go back to some history, going back to World War I. There was a gentleman by the name of Walter Lippmann and a psychologist by the name of Edward Bernays. And Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. And they're the ones that developed the science of propaganda. They were hired by Woodrow Wilson, and they set up the Creel Commission. And what's interesting, you have to go back to World War I and you look at historically, a lot of Americans were on the side of Germany. And so what they decided, in fact, we get into the whole reason around why we shifted. And a deal was made, and we were to go into the war on the side of Britain. So this Creel Commission initiated all of this propaganda. And within about 6 months, they brought the masses to hysteria to go after these, the evil Germans.
Actually, I was listening to Thomas Sheridan talk about that this week in that lecture, and he said that they wanted to bring Germany down because they were a very high spiritual culture. And so this was an attempt to knock
yes.
them down from that.
Yeah, there was, I don't want to get into all the history. There was some deals made. Part of it came from, there were wealthy Jewish people that were, after getting the state of Israel set up, they made a deal, and from that deal, it's interesting because you looked at as soon as they made this deal, they just changed all of the media and then started talking about how Germany was this bad thing. And a lot of these were, so you got to realize, a lot of the wealthy people, if you look at the Rothschilds, Warburgs, they were East German Jews. And so all of a sudden, and so they're on the side of Germany. Initially it was the war start. So all of a sudden they get this deal made that they can get the state of Israel formed if they go along. If England would agree to the formation of the state of Israel, if we can get America on the side of Britain. That was the deal that was made.
Adrian, did you want to come back up?
No, I'm.
Okay.
So then what happened is, following that, and there were some other things that were going on. Woodrow Wilson was blackmailed and other things that brought Brandeis into the Senate. But anyway, through that whole thing, which is interesting, and part that I really want to get at is this whole idea is they shifted gears. So the media started bombarding the population, and so basically what you had is a population that really had no interest in going to war. We've got to remember, we were isolationists back then. And they, through this propaganda in a relatively short period, they learned how powerful that was. And then, as you know, we got into World War I, and we helped Britain. And in fact, if we went into the side of Germany, our entire history probably would have changed. But anyway, that Creel Commission was closed down after World War I. People kind of realized that they kind of went a little bit too far. But it's interesting. So Bernays and Littman ended up forming a public relations firm. You got to remember. So that's introducing this whole idea of how to, change the masses. And if you go back to the television series Scandal, that's Olivia
Yes.
Pope. This is her profession. Basically, create the spin. So anyway, they ran a public relations firm and continued to, again, manipulate the population. So not just in the business world and in the field of marketing. And I said I would talk again about that. You were talking about products and what they were doing, like with Cheerios and other things.
Repositioning Cheerios.
Yeah, I spent some time. I was down in Los Angeles at a conference, and I was visiting with this nurse who was saying that during the early 80s, there was a group of food companies, and they also had some representatives from the tobacco industry. Mm-hmm. And what they said was, hey, you guys are just behind where we've been. In other words, now with the rise up, people realize that tobacco may not be the healthiest thing. They said eventually what's going to happen is people are going to wake up and realize that the food that you've been feeding them has not necessarily been the most healthy for them, and maybe actually harming their health. Well, so they needed to get out in front of that. And part of what came out of that, you started seeing the companies reposition the foods. And so you started seeing, we used the example like Cheerios, where they were talking about, oh, it's good for your heart health and all this. It's probably insignificant when you look at if you did the research. But they started trying to make foods appear to be this is the healthy choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
But don't you think there's more to that in reality side?
Mm-hmm.
Look who's buying Kraft, Coors Beer, and all these food
Yes.
companies. It's the same tobacco companies
Yes.
that probably set these people up
Yes.
for a buyout down the line without them understanding.
Well, actually, I think that's part of why they were there at the meeting, is because you think about like Philip Morris owns.
And RJ Tobacco.
Yeah,
I think,
they
owns
started
Kraft.
diversifying, and they own a lot of these food industries.
Yeah.
And they're as I said, so they were just talking about this idea that what we have is we've got a situation that's going to be quite difficult.
So it's really basically about manipulating your perception.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's necessarily the truth.
Exactly. And so what I'm saying is, and let's go back to what I said with Theodore Roosevelt. Think about this, just if we each think about this, of all the things that we believe, let's just assume 25% of it is not even true. And let's use that as a starting point. And as Theodore Roosevelt said, that would far exceed my wildest expectations if
25%
only
was
25%. Yeah, in other words,
true.
if I knew 75% of things that, I said I could go to the stock market, I could, do all kinds of things. But, so we start with that. The other thing that I think gets a little more difficult, I believe, and this is part of what I think is true, I believe that there are people that are actually deliberately trying to control the population. So,
Control the population to what end?
to basically create a docile society that's
Okay.
compliant.
With vaccinations and fluoride and chemtrails and
All of-
additives in the food and
But also through our educational systems, through what comes out through the media, what comes out through the television programming, what comes out through what they call this infotainment or disinfotainment. So what they're doing is, again, they're creating the reality for us.
Is that what those columns are about in Georgia?
The Georgia Guidestones.
Georgia
Yeah,
Guidestones. Yes.
Yes. You know, I want to talk about this. Carol and I, years ago, ran across an interesting book. And it was written by, the pen name of the gentleman who wrote the book was Frank R. Wallace. And he wrote a book on how to cheat at poker.
Carol and I came across this. What do you mean? I introduced it to you.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
I just want to
Yeah,
reality check there, folks.
So this book was about how do you cheat at cards, and he came up. And by the way, this is it's like a PhD out of, I think it was Dow Chemical. I think is where he came from, and studied how could you do this systematically. And basically, he came up with a system that involved multiple people using signals, and they were very effective at cheating at cards. Okay, so there was an interesting thing that he determined out of this. You could cheat very effectively using these methods.
Got it.
But if somebody knew that what these techniques were, that you couldn't get away with it. So what he determined is there was this idea called neo-cheating or new cheating, and he said they're using certain techniques, they're manipulating the population. If you can understand what they're doing, if you understand the techniques that they use, and we talk about if they're manipulating the population, once you understand what they're doing, you see through it. It's obvious.
The technique isn't new, it's actually old,
Sure.
but it's new to you. It's new once you recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about to hear a word from our sponsors,
Okay.
folks. Thank you for watching. Oh, look at that. Well, this is a wonderful product. We have been sleeping on it for about 7 years, and it helps to stimulate the body to self-repair. So go to the website.
How much time do we have?
Hi, and welcome to Brood, your local cafe and pub. Offering you a variety of services, we have beer, coffee, wine, and food. You can find us on Facebook at Brood360 and online at broodcafepub.com.
Okay. Hello, folks. Welcome back. Go ahead and take your drink, Mike. You need to replenish. And so he was talking about neo-cheating, and neo-cheating is just recognizing in your own experience a new form of manipulation or cheating. And that's one thing, again, in Thomas Sheridan this week, as I listened to his lecture, is that he was talking about how we are not aware enough yet to wake up, to identify where the psychopaths and the psychopathic systems, we are going to have to evolve to that space. And again, he does encourage, you don't go after them, you don't argue with them, you don't fight with them, you simply step off the chessboard that they're playing. That way you take away power from them and you give freedom back to yourself. So it's just a matter of changing your understanding and your perception about where they are. You don't have to believe them, you don't have to play with them, but just walk away. So you wanted to talk about silent weapons for quiet wars, is that what it's
I
called?
thought I would introduce the audience to this document. In fact, I'll just have a picture of it. You can download this off the internet. Search for Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And a number of people have said that this appears to be a genuine document. It's kind of an interesting story, how this document surfaced. What happened was a Boeing employee bought a surplus copier. And I don't know if you know this, but copiers sometimes store information that's been copied on them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this is back in the 80s, and what happened was, I think it was like 1986 when he found this document. So this document was it was a CIA internal memo that was used in some kind of training exercise. And so it has some very interesting things. And so I'm just going to read a few interesting segments of this and talk about this idea of control. It says, it is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of society, the engineering of social automation systems, silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, etc., slavery and genocide. The manual is in itself an analog to declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Sorry.
You can't look at it, folks can't read it, can't understand it.
Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group or persons in a position of great power and with full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religions, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity.
Sounds psychopathic to me.
And yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. That's
not a virtue.
So, well, that's what they're saying. Now, this actually does follow this idea. This is like a psychopathic intent. So let's go further.
I'm getting through.
All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge. The end is control. I don't know if I would say that. I believe it's this search for truth.
Yes.
Beyond this remains only one issue. Who is to be the beneficiary? In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent.
Stakes on the table? Mean they're going to eat us?
Well, that's the analogy that they're giving. Consequently, in the interests of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, wealth, of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. Of course, they're defining who's worthy. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure, and apply new weapons, which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principles of operation and public appearance as to earn for them the name silent weapons. So again, it was a subtle technique. So they get into in doing a lot of research where they were doing things.
They just want me to hold it up.
No.
No, they want me to.
You
You talk. Here, you talk. I'll hold up so they can.
So I'm going to read some
I know.
additional
Talk.
quotes.
They can zoom in on the
So what was happening with this document is they get into the whole economic theory, and a lot of it's high-level mathematics, and basically what they're talking about is creating mathematical models of society, and with the evolution of computers, to be able to run the calculations and understand what would happen to society. So one of the things that they looked at is, for example, shockwave testing. They talked about as it came out of the like the airplane industry. When they did shockwave testing, they would introduce a shock and watch what happened. Well, they would also study what would happen if they did shocks into the society. So let's say I shock the society by a gas crisis or oil price crisis or food shortages or electrical outages.
70s.
Whatever, yes.
Or a Boston bombing episode at a race.
Or a Boston bombing. And so
or Sandy Hook.
Yes, or Sandy Hook, or what happened following 9/11. So that's a shock to the system and what happens. And so then they start following the variables and look at how this works, and they become more and more sophisticated with what they can get away with and how they can control the population.
Just a reminder, folks, this is a live call-in show, 360-693-7544. 360-693-7544. Mike's on a roll, go.
All right, diversion and the primary strategy. Experience has presented that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of the basic system principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design, and economics, and discouraging technical creativity. Engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape, by way of constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers.
Did you say mental and emotional rape?
Yes. Giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. Rewriting history and law, and this is one of the things that I hate, those that goes back to 1984, those that control the present will control the past, and those who control the past will control the future.
Yep.
Okay.
So rewriting history and law and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude the interest and discovery of silent weapons of social automation technology. And here's a summary. Media. Keep adult population diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. Schools. Keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. Entertainment. Keep the public entertained below a 6th grade level. Work. Keep the public busy with no time to think back on the farm with the other animals.
So when they create these false flag events, the best thing we can do is to not be reactive to it.
So what I want to leave you with is this. We started this discussion, we talked about objective reality. So there really is a true reality, and it's our mission in life and each of our own personal responsibilities to try to come closer and closer to understanding what is the true nature of reality.
Or seen through these illusions
And
that
seen
are
through the
being put
illusions.
forth to manipulate us.
Yes. I've concluded as you look at it, and as I bring this topic up, that the idea that we could be manipulated, it should start becoming apparent. Once you start looking for it, you will see these are the techniques that they're using, and it becomes more apparent. And so that becomes then our journey as we go through our lives. We of course want to better understand we have our own spiritual development. We have all these things that we're trying to understand. But as we look at understanding the world, understanding politics, understanding our history, understanding the nature of our world, we have to be careful because there are people that don't want us to know that.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about it is, going back to what we were describing about neo-cheating, once you understand it, for example, an individual once told me, he said, when you see a program that's introduced, one of the things that they will do is they will introduce a reason for why this program should be there, like the Federal Reserve. There's a reason why this should be there, and you will find that the real intent that why they want this program or why they want this structure is completely different than what they're presenting it as.
Yep.
Or
So-
its true function.
Yes, so like the Federal Reserve System, it will be the end of bank failures. That's how it was promoted. How much? 15 years later, every bank in the country was closed and deemed to be insolvent. So that's the techniques. So part of it, and I think that's our mission, is to start looking at how do they do that? What are the techniques so that we as individuals can wake up? I don't think we can wake up the entire masses, but I think that enough of us can start moving along that path.
Well, hopefully, folks, you have been provoked to consider and think and see through some things
should
that have
be.
been presented.
The stuff he's talking about, I hope a lot of us are doing this, flashing back to the last even 10, 20 years.
Well, we'll see you next week, folks, and we'll continue this conversation amongst us. And too bad you're not here to listen to it, because it can get really interesting sometimes.
You bring up some good points. Do you still do lectures?
It's funny, last year I got called out of retirement to work with a company, which I hadn't done in 12 years. And it was
Shut
really,
your mic off.